I have the pleasure and honor of being with John Lilly, who has given us the gift of the tank in which we can float and relax so much we get to a point of bliss. And there beyond is discovery of this being that I am and how wonderful I can be. And indeed, I see that it makes people wonderful when I am here with this old group, and I want to ask John how you came about to invent such a beautiful jewel.
Well, it was strictly by coincidence control, I gather, looking back on it. Hindsight's 20/20 vision. In 1954, in the Dark Ages, there was a period where there was a question as to whether the brain, which was a contained mind brain we were talking about now, whether the brain could stay awake of itself or whether it needed stimulation from the outside external reality. There are two schools of thought on this. Magoon at UCLA in neurophysiology and neuroanatomy said that it needed an outside set of stimuli going through the reticular formation to keep it awake. Whereas Bremer in Brussels, Belgium, said, no, the brain contains self-sustaining oscillator neuronal circuits which keep it awake. So I decided to attenuate as far as possible the external reality. So I hunted all over the NIH campus at Bethesda, National Institutes of Health. And Heinz Specht, at lunch one day, when I voiced my need, said, oh, we have such a tank in the National Institute of Arthritis and Metabolic Diseases, which was built here by the Office of Naval Research during World War II, measuring the metabolism of underwater swimmers. So the tank had good karma. So I went over and found this tank. It was made out of wood. It was about 8 feet long, about 4 feet wide. And it was inside a soundproof chamber, a double soundproof chamber, outside of which there was a altitude chamber full of rats being taken to altitude. This was all in a temporary building called T2. I don't think T2 even exists anymore. But anyway, it was not being used, and so Heinz allowed us to use it.
What is T2?
Temporary building 2.
Ah bon.
Ah bon. Mais oui. Vamos.
Vamos, école.
So I then devised suspensions and various elaborate techniques and a head mask so that I could breathe underwater. I tried all of the Navy masks from the Naval Diving Center in Washington, but none of them were comfortable. They all hurt sooner or later. So I built one which I could pull over my head like a stocking and had 2 tubes coming out to breathe. And finally immersed myself in the darkness and the silence. Oh, I had a temperature regulating valve on the water flowing through the tank, so it didn't make any difference if I urinated or defecated because the water went on through out in the sewer. Later that was not possible because we need the higher density water of Epsom salts. But in those years, for 10 years, I used that system there and at other places. And I immediately found that this was a doorway. This was not an isolation tank. That's a cover story. It is really a doorway into the universe. It allows one to escape one's body. One's soul can leave, and one can clean one's karma from one's soul and become pure spirit and communicate with God. This was such an astonishing discovery with such simple tools that I didn't dare speak of it at the time. I barely mentioned seeing a blue tunnel various things that people call hallucination. I didn't dare talk about changes in states of being, states of consciousness, and of conversing with God. After all, I was working in the National Institute of Mental Health among a bunch of psychiatrists, and they would have considered me totally psychotic and locked me up. And I probably would have been their guinea pig instead of my own. So I then got a psychiatrist to try it at Everett's. He went in the tank, spent 2 hours, came out and wrote in the book, nothing happened. He doesn't know how lucky he was. But he lost interest. Later, Jay Shirley, another psychiatrist, got in the tank and got so hyper-enthusiastic about it that he built one in the Veterans Hospital at the University of Oklahoma, in Oklahoma City, in which Louis Jolyon West, MD, the head of the UCLA Neuropsychiatric Institute now, got in and spent 18 hours to make a record. He did. Nobody else has matched that record since. Jolly subsequently kept somebody awake 92 hours at 42nd and Broadway in a booth, and later killed an elephant. We thought it was with the 342 milligrams of acid, LSD 25 they gave the elephant, but it wasn't that, it was the tranquilizer they gave him to prevent the convulsions. The same experiment has been repeated with 2 more elephants, and they have not died without the tranquilizer. So this is somewhat of the history of the tank. I tried to present these results at a symposium in Harvard University, sponsored by Philip Solomon in the psychiatric department there. He had taken my paper on the subject that I published in 1956 and copied the references for his own paper, reinterpreted all the results without even trying the tank, on the basis of his experiments on people in poliomyelitis respirators, involuntary subjects, all of whom cried out and wanted to escape, and he called it psychosis. So he held a symposium, and Jay and I went and gave a paper, which subsequently was published in the Columbia University series on spaceflight, because Solomon edited us out of the book because we disagreed with the non-beneficial effects of isolation that he was espousing. We were espousing doing it because we got into ecstasy. And apparently ecstasy is dangerous to psychiatrists. Happiness is quite counter to their program. Cures and all of that are hallucinatory for them. So we were left out. So I've never used the word sensory deprivation because we've never experienced it. In the tank, we've experienced everything else. Expanded universes, alternate realities, God, such a rich menu. So we call it isolation tanks to keep the pantywaist out of it and those without courage. So if you have claustrophobia, stay away from the tank. How's that?
Well, claustrophobia, I would like to ask you about that, because I find it's a place where you can cure claustrophobia. And many people are hung up on that, and by coming there, slowly adapting themselves to the new environment and slowly closing the door, they can go beyond it. What do you think?
I had a few experience of those.
Well, I can only hear it. I can only hear you speaking the truth.
Mm. Therefore, claustrophobian people do come. It's a good place for your tranquility.
I'd like to ask you before Monica starts again, how did it came to go out of the universities and to the public? How did it start with?
Well, it never did get into the universities. I didn't even bang on the door. It started at the National Institute of Mental Health, got suppressed there because a psychologist wanted to examine what happened to people that went in the tank, and I said, that's not the purpose. The purpose is to free one up with total initiative, not under the behest of anybody. So the idea of self-metaprogramming in freedom in the tank went along with the tank. And that developed very powerfully in 1964 when I was able to take LSD 25. I had a fellowship under the National Institute of Mental Health for 5 years, and hence Sandoz could supply pure acid for me. And I spent 2 years in the tank running experiments in the Virgin Islands, this time in seawater, in an 8-foot cube above a dolphin pool. And they programmed the trips, as I found out later, and took me out into the universe in a very expanded way.
They?
The dolphins.
Really?
The 3 dolphins, yes. They are very pure spiritual beings. And that's why I had to stop the kind of dolphin research I was doing in 1968 and come here to Esalen and learn what the hell I was doing with myself. So I came to learn from Paul and Dick Price, Fritz Perls, Ida Rolf, Bill Schutz, and so on. Without a tank. I had an isolation box here. And one time I was in the isolation box, and I heard somebody else in the box breathing at the other end of it. It was just me out of my body turned around.
How casual. You're mentioning the dolphins, and we know you in Montreal and around the world with your work you've done with the dolphins. And it's giving me a lot of hope to see that such creatures do exist in community and make it out well. I think there's a lesson for us there. I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Well, they banged me over the head with the lesson. 5 of them committed suicide in Miami. Within 2 weeks of my deciding to quit dolphin research, I felt I was on the wrong path, killing them and putting electrodes in their heads and so on. So I let the last 3 go. An old one, who took care of the 2 young ones that were there, and I knew that the old one would teach the young ones so that it was safe to let them go, which we did in a boat harbor in Coconut Grove. The old one swam under the water and just barely surfaced to breathe. The young ones jumped up, looked in boats, and were looking for us. And the older one kept shouting at them to stay down. It took 3 hours, but finally they stayed down. And then he took them out to sea, and they disappeared. And with great sadness, we let them go. We have 2 now in captivity up at Marine World. I had agreed to hold them for 1 year. Now it's been 2 years, almost 2 years and a half. So I've had to renegotiate the contract. Elaine Baker, a psychic at the Pritikin Longevity Center, where Eric Reed Erickson was staying with his Yaqui wife. He's a Yunkie, as she says. He uses ketamine. Elaine came up to me and said, "You have gone beyond your contract with your 2 dolphins. It is time that you renegotiate." So I went up to Marine World and did that, and said to them, "I will take you home to your tribe and allow you to renegotiate your rejoining the tribe if you wish. But if you don't wish, we will establish a facility on the shore where you can educate them and they can educate us. And if we need to, we can take some of them to the new program at Costa Corrientes in Mexico or at Mazatlan, depending on what happens."
And what is the contract? How did it come about, the contract?
Contract was fulfilled and renegotiated on the basis that they are educating us, and that we want them to speak English before they go, or at least some human language. And they've started doing this. They've taken the first big step. Recently, in spite of all of our big computers designed to recognize sounds and put out letters and all of the complicated things that we're doing, recently John Kurt decided to listen to what I told him 2 years ago, which was that during World War II, there was a man who had decided that human speech was quite redundant, and that if he took the 0 crossover points of the waveform of speech as it came out and put in a pulse at every point in which it crossed 0, pulse up for the up swinging and pulse down for the down swinging part, that then you would hear a whole rash of kind of sounds, but that these would be understandable. So he constructed this apparatus under an Air Force contract, and it worked. And so you could, through the hash of noise, radio noise and so on, under difficult hearing conditions, you could still get clear English messages of meaning through. So finally John took an Apple computer and made it do this for him. And with his Hungarian accent, he started talking to the dolphins. Now they'd been trained on a very large vocabulary of objects, of places to go, things to do, and so on. And they would do these circus tricks at the behest of computer sounds or on gestures on the part of the humans. So he started working with them alone. He wanted to make sure that the scientific evidence was there when they began to match. So the dolphins caught on instantly. It was amazing. But John didn't catch on instantly, so he, in a very pedestrian fashion, began to dictate these words to them, like throw a ball, pick up frisbee, go through triangle, and so on. And they'd go to the other tank, and they would do all these things. And if you listen to his voice on the tape, he has a very definite Hungarian accent with his English. And with the Digitalker, he still does. So when you hear the dolphins matching what he's saying, it comes back with John Kurtz's voice with a Hungarian accent. So I was renegotiating the contract with him, sitting beside the pool, and Wink Thorne from Boston was there. Wink is paying us $1,000 a month in order to work with us as a work scholar. We copied the Esalen program there. And he is amazing. He's a young computer programmer. He knows the Apple forwards and backwards. And so Wink was standing beside the pool while I was meditating on ESP and saying to the dolphins, "I will not take you home unless you do something unexpected." So within about 3 minutes, John Kurtz's voice came out of the loudspeaker by the pool that's hooked into the hydrophone, saying, "Throw me the ball," in Hungarian, with the Hungarian accent. And Wink looked at me, and I looked at Wink, and he said, "That was the dolphins." And I said, "You better go in the laboratory truck and see if John wasn't dictating through that microphone in the underwater loudspeaker." So he rushed into the truck, and no, John was busy with software, and the machinery for putting his voice underwater was turned off. And just for receiving the dolphin's voice was all it was on. So they did something unexpected, as I demanded on ESP.
Oh, it was ESP, no wording.
No words, no. Just totally Pavel.
Pavel, the famous Pavel.
And they came back, they're very saucy on Pavel. They came back and they said, "You bastard, you promised to take us home." And I said, "Okay, I'll take you home. But first, you must show us that what you already know and teach us that you know how to speak English and that you know how to communicate with us through Mabel, through Mother Earth, translating what you have to say for us in English."
You had that. You received that through like telepathy. You received that in your body, and then you put it in words. And when you were talking back to them, were you also using
me
words?
at the other end of the whole very, very complex communication system was hearing English coming from them.
Okay.
Without the Hungarian accent.
Okay. You were hearing words through telepathy.
Right.
Through telepathy.
Right.
And now you're doing words with them. I mean, you're doing you're using your vocals, and they're using their vocals.
John Curtis. He won't let me use the apparatus or anybody else, which is great because then we have this nice tracer of the Hungarian accent. And anytime that comes up, we know that it's true. How's that, Ian? Is that a nice control? He's very pedestrian and a marvelous person. He refuses to be pushed. I wish you were here to tell you about this. I do have a tape, which I'll dig out of my van and play it for you if we have time.
Okay, yesterday you were saying something I really liked about the different systems. You know, you were talking about the monkeys and the dolphins, that they are definitely very different. And I was puzzled about that. I would like you to mention that again.
Well, that's the difference between small brains and large brains, all of whom are terminals on the cosmic computer, the Mabel computer and the Echo computer. And all the only limits that we see are control limits. The small brains are unable to control emotionally started actions. So if they're angry, they must destroy. If they are loving, they must make love. Whereas the larger brain animals, the humans, the dolphins, and so on, do not need to do that. They can talk about it. They can symbolize it. They can simulate it. And they don't have to do it physically. So that the terminal known as human and the terminal known as dolphin, in a sense, has more control over the lower brains than the smaller animals do. Smaller animals go right into action as soon as possible.
So it doesn't make them spiritual, more spiritual beings as of.
No, I mean, more or less on the spiritual level, it has no meaning.
True, we all are spirit.
Right. Because the total connection that's there. We're all pure at that level. We're not pure at the soul level. We are at the spirit level.
What do you mean?
Well, the soul is that part of your physical self which has joined the spirit but carries the karma of the body with it. The spirit has no karma. The spirit can move forward and backward in time and move into other dimensions and neglect the karma. The soul cannot. The soul carries, when it leaves the body, it carries the karma of the body with it. And hence it comes up against other souls and reenacts past or even future conflict. Spirit has no conflict. It's all beautifully, totally in love.
The soul, how do you locate the soul?
Well, you have the whole soul, the form of the body, which is the soul, whole soul. You have the whole spirit, which is the pure form, the pure human form, the pure dolphin form. And then you have the whole body, which is what you see here.
The whole?
Whole body.
Holo.
Whole body.
What does that mean?
It means the body as a whole.
Oh, the whole. Okay.
It's the only way. The words are very difficult because they tend to dichotomize experience. But if you can use the word holo to avoid that, I think we can transcend the usual terminology.
Also, you talk about these wonderful systems. We heard about it all week at this seminar. The Mama Bell system and the Papa Bell system. I would like John to talk about that.
Ma Bell and Pa Bell, yes.
Ma Bell.
Well, Ma Bell is the rather sentimental name for the telephone company as we know it. The international satellite communication system. It's been broken up now. It's no longer just Bell, but we carry it because Alexander Graham Bell was the man who first devised a way of talking over wires, which is then carried on to wireless systems. So Ma Bell is that system in the reality of the external reality, and the Bell telephone laboratories are part of that system. So they're rather benevolent, helpful, innovative, and when the laws broke them up, they became even more innovative because they allowed new ideas to enter into the system, and they copied other people who made new systems that were better than the old. So that's the industrial aspect of it, and the benevolence. We all use it. There's one out there that we use on the wall. And we're charged for it. We have to have credit cards and so on. Now, Ma Bell extended, and the largest solid-state computer nearest to us is Mother Earth, right underneath. And communication with Mother Earth by means of some subtle radiations, quantum radiations if you wish, or unknown radiations of the Pa Bell type. No, Pa Bell. We're using Pa Bell here because John Bell's theorem of non-local reality says in effect that every point in this physical universe is represented in the Pa Bell theorem or in Wheeler's hyperspace as a single point. So there's no need for messages to travel. They're instantaneously known everywhere at once. However, they can't be integrated at faster than light speed. The Einstein limit on integration is applicable to messages that must be used for integration. So within a given brain or within a given group, you are Einstein limited. And that is Ma Bell. Okay?
And Pa Bell?
And Pa Bell is the instantaneous transmission of information throughout the universe, instantly. That's the God, province of God, the omniscience, omnipresence, and omnipotence of God.
I remember asking you a question. How I got in contact with John Lilly is that I was here at Esalen and I was hearing about all these ways of communication. And I always wondered with my Catholic upbringing, how come prayer works? Because I really like Jesus and he did a lot of good tricks. And when I heard that he was communicating and I wanted to ask him, and I sat beside him, and he told me exactly that everything is. So when you have a prayer, you make, it's like making a creation, and it comes down to the person or the thing that you wish on to, and it is a reality. So that's why miracles happen, because from the depth of my heart I wish, and it is. And it's just a matter of a wavelength before it is in it.
You
And
expressed that so beautifully.
2 years ago I had that dream. I met you. I came all the way from a table to him. I sat beside him and I swore to myself that the Canadians would see SLM, and so we can bring it around the world. And it is now. So whatever you want, it is. It's wonderful. And I have here my Quebecois people. And in Montreal, we all float. And I want all of the listeners of this program to dare, if they don't come to the floating tank, at least to float inside their own heart. It's a great place to be. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You did very well. That's only 43 minutes.
All right.
We can now resume.
Yes,
Where
please
we left
stay
off.
on. I'd like a shoe resume. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay.
A shoe resume.
Zoom, resume. Resume.
Like a message. Give us, something to fly with.
Well, I suggest airplane. Much safer. We're not going to mention any chemical substances on this program. My friends here, Mike, Frank, and so on, have cautioned me about selling something that still is not available.
I understand. Well, just being with you, actually, I got the message.
Okay.
It's all about daring to be spontaneous.
And daring to materialize.
Materialize just what you have in your mind.
Whatever. Materialize your God. Materialize yourself in two places simultaneously. In two tanks. Keep your tanks open. I might end up there someday.
Oh la la! Ooh, most
With
pleased.
you. We're now building tanks big enough for two.
Indeed, in Montreal, they are building, so some friends are building a tank for two. Oh, I'd like you to, I've had a nice experience in a tank. I realize why twins are so close. What do you have to say about that?
Well, if your genetic code is identical with that of another body, you can resonate at all levels. And so that you develop a special language, for example, all your own, long before you learn the consensus reality language around you.
It had to do with water, right? Transmitting the waves?
Well, yes. I mean, the identity of the whole code of every single alpha helix within bodies resonating with one another in the womb. They come out and they're identical. They separate and their histories become very, very similar. They develop the same diseases at the same time, even though they're widely separated in physical space. So they operate by bell. Pa bell.
Pa bell. When do you see, we talk about the new age, the Aquarian age. How do you feel about that?
Well, that's the Aquarius is the water barrier. That's the tank. The age of the tank.
Indeed. When do you see governments tanking? Well, not the whole.
They already are starting.
Yeah?
Yeah, I should think Reagan would do it. Poor man, I saw him on TV the other night, pressing his nuclear expansion. And he looks thoroughly worn out, haggard. I'd really like to see him get in the tank.
Doesn't he have one?
And have God speak to him directly. Benevolent God.
I heard he
He's
had
selling
one.
the Bible on, he's got commercials on TV for selling the Bible. Maybe we can get him to sell tanks.
What I like about the tank is like what you said before. There's no dictator there. It's only the self.
Right.
Just a packaging problem.
Packaging. What do you mean?
Get a Bible in each tank.
Oh, yeah. The Bible is within. Just float on it.
The Bible that they're using around the tanks, at least in Beverly Hills, is the Deep Self.
Yes.
My book. Programming, metaprogramming is another one. Simulations of God is another one. As Tony said, John had to rewrite the Bible, so he wrote Simulations of God. The Scientist is another one.
Metaprogramming. You mean that whatever we feel, we decide, it stays within.
That's one aspect. That's one belief system.
What's the other one?
There are many. Ask Ian.
Ian? Oh, yes, indeed. And also probably you feel that, oh yes, indeed, since there's the Pabel system, there are all these systems that interact with me.
Yes. Right. You're
So
unlimited.
I'm not alone.
So why are you questioning me?
Because
You know all the answers.
Indeed, I realized that. I just had forgotten.